want to bring up our next speaker. Jane Robbins is an attorney and a senior fellow with the American Principles Project in Washington, D.C. In that position, she has crafted federal and state legislation designed to restore the constitutional autonomy of states and parents in education policy and to protect the rights of religious freedom and conscience. With Emmett McGroarty, she co-authored the APP Pioneer Institute report, Controlling Education from the Top, Why Common Core is Bad for America. She has written numerous articles about the problems with Common Core and has testified about the issue before the legislatures of 9 states. She is a graduate of Clemson University and the Harvard Law School. Jane will address the connection of Common Core to the collection and sharing of massive amounts of student data and the dangers that exist now and would grow in the future. Please help me welcome Ms. Jane Robbins.
Okay, we're all fighting with this mic. Okay, can y'all hear that? Okay, all right. Thank you, Mary, for the invitation. This has been a great day. A lot of good things going on, and I'm so glad to see all these people here to talk about this. I would point out that even though I'm with the American Principles Project, I'm not from Washington. I'm from South Carolina originally, but I live in exile in Georgia. So Georgia's had a good day today. The Senate Education Committee voted out the bill to start the process of getting out of Common Core and to protect student data. And it was unanimous. So we're real pleased with that. But anyway, what I want to talk about tonight is the problems with the data collection. Because Common Core is not a problem that exists on its own. It's connected with a lot of other things too. To get race to the top money, and that's the reason the states went into Common Core. No, there's not a state in the country, I would say, that went into it because the standards were good. They went into it because in order to be competitive for race to the top money, you had to agree to adopt the standards, you had to agree to go into one of the national tests, and you had to agree to build out your data system, which all states were already building. The reason they were already building them was that in the early 2000s, there were federal grants designed to get states to build out these massive student data systems. So this predates the Obama administration. This was back in the early Bush II administration. Now when the state, well, okay, why are they doing this? Why do they want a big student data system? Well, you have to remember that Common Core is not an education model. It is a workforce development model. That's what they're trying to do. It's the old 100-plus-year-old progressive philosophy of very smart people controlling things, controlling education, controlling the economy, managing this, managing that, central planning. And you can't do that unless you have data. If you're going to plug kids into their right slot in the economic machine, in the managed economy, you have to have data. So, so that's why they wanted to get the states to build it. Now, it also goes back to remember the infamous stimulus bill from 2009, the one where we spent $1 trillion for no apparent reason? Well, part of that bill was the state fiscal stabilization fund, and if you wanted to get money from that, and just about all the states did, they had to agree to continue to build these massive databases. And all of the databases had to be identical. They had to build them according to specific federal mandates. Now, why would it be that they wanted everybody's database to be identical? Well, because there's a federal statute that says that the federal government cannot maintain a national student database. So, what to do? Well, you get everybody else to build the databases, and then if they're all identical, you can share them, right? Okay, so that is the idea. Now, what kind of kinds of data are we talking about? Well, there is something called the National Education Data Model, which is connected with the Department of Education, and it recommends, it's not required, but it recommends over 400 data points on each child. And these are things like healthcare history, disciplinary history. So if your child has a rough 8th grade year, that data is going to be there forever. That suspension that he got, that'll be there forever. income, voting status, religious affiliation. I don't know why you need that, but they want that. There is, and these, again, are things that the states are encouraged to collect on students. And one of the groups that is really helping out with all of this, and it's a private sort of quasi-governmental entity, as all of these things are. You know, we're no longer governed by people we elect. We are now governed by people who are sort of out there in these strange, unaccountable anonymous groups. One of those unaccountable anonymous groups is called the Data Quality Campaign. And they put out all of this research about what you should be doing with your data and how you build your systems and all this, and the Data Quality Campaign is funded by the Gates Foundation. So, now, one problem that is sort of looms over this whole thing is that, and you will hear Common Core proponents say, but you know, you don't have to worry about this data because it's all being handled in accordance with federal student privacy law, which would have been fine a few years ago, except that we no longer have federal student privacy law. It's called FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It was gutted by the Obama administration 2 years ago. It went into effect January 2012. And what they did by regulation, not by rewriting the statute, of course, they did it by regulation, it relaxed the controls on what sorts of data can be shared. So now, under the new FERPA regulations, they can share, the U.S. Department of Education or your state Department of Education can share personally identifiable student data with literally anyone in the world as long as they use the right language to justify the sharing. And you will not be allowed to challenge that, to opt out of that, because you won't even know it's happening. So that's the state of federal student privacy law, which is why you need a very, very good, tight state data privacy law. Now, a specific connection between the data problem and Common Core is through the testing. Now, Louisiana is in the PARC testing, P-A-R-C-C, right now. I mean, everybody, you know, PARC is, people are dropping like flies out of PARC, and so I don't know how much longer that's going to last. But PARC has a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Department of Education. And this is what the cooperative agreement says. PARC agrees to make student-level data that results from the assessment system available on an ongoing basis for research, including for prospective linking, validity, and program improvement studies. Student-level data. So any data that goes from Louisiana to PARC will go directly to the U.S. Department of Education because that's what their contract calls for. The PARC cooperative agreement with the U.S. Department also says the grantee, that means the PARC, must provide timely and complete access to any and all data collected at the state level to the U.S. Department of Education. So as soon as PARC tells you what you need to give them, and they haven't done it yet, they haven't written the test yet, they're working on it, and they haven't told you what you're going to have to do, what kinds of data you're going to have to give them, but as soon as they do, then, and you start giving it to them, then that's going to the U.S. Department of Education. Also, PARC says, because Louisiana has agreed in its PARC contract that you will try to identify and, I can't remember the word, eliminate, I guess, barriers in state law that might interfere with giving these assessments. And presumably that would include state data privacy law. If that interferes with it, then you've committed to PARC, you're going to get rid of it. Okay, now Louisiana, you'll be happy to know, is very enthusiastic about collecting and sharing data. They have shown their intention to be on the cutting edge. To find out what your state really is doing, it's helpful to go to your Race to the Top application. The Race to the Top applications were hundreds and hundreds of pages long, and in fact, sometimes people, you know, outside funders had to come in and help you to put this thing together. And one of the funders or the main funder who helped Louisiana put its application together was the Gates Foundation. So in that Race to the Top application, Louisiana, and this is where they're telling the U.S. Department of Education, you give us this money, this bribe, and we will do, this is what we'll do with it. And so first of all, they talk about how this is great. They have done all the 10 essential elements of the data quality campaign, and we're one of the few states that have done all that. And so they're very happy with that. And then, oh, by the way, in the data system in Louisiana, for teachers, this isn't for the students, but for the teachers' data system, it's called HCIS, Human Capital Information System. So that's what the teachers are, teachers and administrators. So you're talking about all the student data. Teachers, leaders, administrators, researchers, and other stakeholders, sort of your catch-all, will have unprecedented access to this and other data through the linked human capital identification system, et cetera, et cetera. And Louisiana Department of Education is also eager to share this information with researchers and relevant stakeholders for various reasons. And they talk about sharing it among different agencies within the state, because if you think that the Department of Education is keeping your child's data in the Department of Education, think again. They talk about with what agencies they're sharing it. It says longitudinal data from educational, social service, corrections, health, and workforce systems. Remember, this is a workforce development model, and so they are sharing it with your State Department of Labor. So that's what Louisiana is wanting to do. So let me scoot through some of this right quickly. And also, of course, y'all are probably familiar with the whole In Bloom debacle in Louisiana, where you were in Bloom, which is something funded by the Gates Foundation. Very good. So In Bloom is essentially a cloud computing service where they're supposed to, I won't get into all the details of it, primarily because I don't understand them all, but they are supposed to take the data from the different repositories and make it all usable. And some states went into it, and they were all excited about this, and this is going to be great, until parents started to find out about it, and they said, maybe it's not so great. And so John White got out of it quickly. But if I were y'all, I would keep a close eye. Sometimes we have found in other states when people say, oh, no, we're not going to do something, we're out of this, we're out of that, sometimes it doesn't quite work out that way. So just keep an eye. Okay. Now, I just wanted to talk about my little prop I carry with me everywhere I go. This is a report that y'all may have seen before. Some of you may have seen it. It's called Promoting Grit, Tenacity, and Perseverance, Critical Factors for Success in the 21st Century. This came out in February 2013. It's from the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Educational Technology. It was on their website. And this talks about how in the 21st century, which is, of course, different from every other century as far as education goes, you have to focus not so much on content knowledge because, you know, hey, if you want to know something, you can Google it. So why should school waste time teaching you something? So you have to develop things such as the 21st century skills, which all start with C for some reason: collaboration, consensus, you know, all of that stuff. Critical thinking, which is baloney. It's not critical thinking, but and so if you're going to teach kids how to do that, you need to develop the right mindsets and the right attitudes and values and dispositions. That's what 21st century education is supposed to be, and this report talks about it. And of course, if you're going to try to develop that, you've got to have a way to measure it, right? Especially when in the Common Core standards, there is a math standard, for example, that says that you are to make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. So if you've got to persevere, it's right there in the standards, so you're going to have to measure it, right? Okay. So the grit, this is from the U.S. Department of Education now. So they talk about different ways you could measure it. And they said some of the most promising directions are educational data mining and effective, with an A, effective computing. So what is effective computing? Well, this is what that means. I didn't know what that meant. Effective computing is the study and development of systems and devices that can recognize, interpret, process, and simulate aspects of human affect, with an A. Emotional or physiological variables can be used to measure, they're talking about measuring emotions. Discrete emotions particularly relevant to reactions to challenge, such as interest, frustration, anxiety, and boredom, may be measured through analysis of facial expressions, EEG brainwave patterns, skin conductance, heart rate variability, posture, and eye tracking. This is what they say should be measured. And for those of you who have seen this report, sometimes I'm doing these things and somebody will shout out page 44. This is page 44. They give you pictures of how they would do it. Here we have a picture of a facial expression camera, a posture analysis seat, so presumably if you're bored, you know, you're sort of slumping in your chair, a pressure mouse for your computer, and wireless skin conductance sensor, so you can measure temperature and all of that kind of stuff. So, so if you use things like that, then you can sort of tell what's going on with the child. There's another report that I actually do have it, it's up there, but it's another big one, and I don't want to haul it around. But it came out the same time from the U.S. Department of Education, and it has a completely meaningless name. It's called Expanding Evidence Approaches for Learning in a Digital World, and it talks about digital learning platforms and how they can really help people collect all of this data on students. And we're not talking about the kind of data you're thinking about. You're not talking about the name, address, and all that stuff. What they're talking about is they want to know what they call the fine-grained data. They want to know not what your child knows, but how he thinks, to predict how he might handle something. Does he have these issues? Does he have that issues? Does he get frustrated easily? And they do this with the digital learning. That this report it was written by Karen Cator and C-A-T-O-R. So the Cator report talks about all these digital learning platforms. And when I say digital learning, I'm not talking about having a great professor with a great lecture that you watch on a screen. That's not it. What we're talking about is the digital platforms where you have a prompt and then a response and a prompt and then a response. And so it's sort of a Pavlov kind of thing. That's what they're doing, because with every keystroke, with everything the child does, they can measure data on that child and figure out what is going on in the child's brain. There was a session that was done by the U.S. Department of Education about 15 months ago called Datapalooza in Washington, and they had a bunch of people who came there who were the executive directors of these digital learning companies, and one guy